You've heard me say it for weeks now. I'm going to say it again. If you're not in a group, get connected to a group here at Hoboken Grace. We've got something really exciting starting in just a couple weeks here at Hoboken Grace. We have our short-term dinner groups that are starting. Those are groups that are about 6 to 10 weeks long and are specifically focused on one topic. So we've got groups that are looking at dating. We've got groups that are looking at marriage. We've got groups that are walking through new to the faith and what it means to step into faith. If you want to find out more about that on your app, just click find a group or join a group and you'll be able to see the different ones that are available and when those are launching. But you need to be a part of a group. It's essential to what we do here at Hoboken Grace. For those of you who are with us for the first time, as Anthony said, welcome. My name is Chris. I'm lead pastor here at Hoboken Grace. And today is a very unique Sunday for us because we're in between series. And typically what we do here at Hoboken Grace is we spend anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks breaking down a passage or breaking down something that God has called us to understand about ourselves or to understand about Him. But for the next couple weeks, we've got a little time before we get into that next series, When Life Crumbles. And we do that on purpose because we want to create space for us to be able to speak into things that we see happening inside of our church family or things that are happening inside of our culture that we think God would have us address or that God would have us to walk through together. And that's exactly what we're going to do today, because I think that right now there's something that's developing inside of our culture that can be really destructive to the way in which we engage God, the way in which we experience God, the way in which we engage community, the way in which we experience community, and I want to make sure that we're aware of it. And I think it's important for us to be able to walk through, okay, how does God speak to this? And it pertains to correction. Let me explain. The other day, my wife came to me and she said, Chris, we need to talk. And I said, tomorrow? And she said, no, we need to talk today, which I was not incredibly excited about, but I said, okay. And she said to me, she said, you know, I don't know if you know this or not, but you are consistently overriding me with the kids, and it's not healthy. It's not good. And I'll have them begin to do something, and then you come home, and then you have them begin to do something else, and you're not consulting me. And I said, okay. And I recognized, like, no, that this is a problem. And I walked out of that, and here's the thing about me. I hate being wrong. I hate being wrong. But there's something that I hate more. You know what that is? Being told that I'm wrong. And I walked out of that, and I wasn't just frustrated about being wrong. I was frustrated about being told that I was wrong. And I'm betting that the same thing is true about you. Have you ever experienced this where you know something is happening in your life that you need to address? And you're beginning to think through how you're going to address that and what you need to do and how that needs to happen. And then someone steps into your life and points it out to you. And you think to yourself, I'm not changing now. You ever experience that? Am I just processing out loud by myself up here? Like, I think all of us have experienced that. And it's insane. We would rather sit in our own crap than to admit that they were right about something we already knew about in the first place. It's amazing. It's not just that we don't like being wrong. More importantly, we don't like being told that we're wrong. And I don't think this is new. I don't think this is unique to us or our culture. I don't think historically you could go back and find a culture that just loved being told that they were wrong and embraced correction. I don't think that's true. But I do think that there's something happening inside of our culture where it's not just that we're uncomfortable with correction. It's not just that we dislike correction. There's something that's happening where we're beginning to talk about and to engage. We're beginning to think about. We're beginning to teach that correction isn't just uncomfortable, but that correction is an injustice. That to be corrected is to be wronged. That to be corrected is to be shamed. It's to be injured. And I'll have conversations with people, and they'll say to me, well, so-and-so hurt me. They hurt me, not just in like a passing thing, but like a deep injury. Well, what did they do? Well, they told me that I was wrong. Well, were they right? Doesn't matter. There is developing in our culture an idea that to be corrected is to be wrong. It's tricky because we don't say that we don't agree or that we don't believe in correction. As a matter of fact, we are very adamant about correcting. We correct all the time, but here's the subtlety of it. Because of the fact that we've bought into the idea that to be corrected is to be injured, when we correct, we actually correct for the purpose of injuring. And so we hurl corrections at one another, and those corrections are encased in words that are meant to shame and meant to injure and meant to cause pain. You can go on your social media feed right now and watch it happen. And again, it's tricky because we've believed that to be corrected is to be injured. And so we use correction to injure. And it feeds into this cyclical system because then we use correction to injure. And then as we watch correction being used to injure, it feeds into the idea that correction is to injure. It's to harm. And so we correct. We correct those that we dislike. We correct those that we hate. We don't correct those that we love. And we didn't just get here. This isn't something that just happened. This is something that's been developing for quite some time. This is a road that we've been on for quite some time inside of our culture. And we look back and we joke about certain things that changed. And these are just things that changed on the surface. But you've heard jokes about the fact that we no longer use red ink to correct papers anymore, and teachers stopped using red ink. But the reality is we actually did that because we didn't want for someone to be offended by correction. And we joke about participation trophies, but the reality is we began to give participation trophies because we didn't want for anyone to be told that despite what they might believe, they're not actually the best. And for quite some time we've been going down this road. And this idea has been building. And it's beginning to cement itself in the way that we think about the world and what we believe about the world. that correction is, in fact, to injure. And that to be corrected is to be wronged. The problem with that is this. That's not a minor shift from what Jesus has taught us. That's the complete opposite of what Jesus has taught us. That's the complete opposite of what Jesus has spoken into our story. I don't know if you know this or not, but as God steps into our story, he has a lot to say about correction. He talks about it a lot. Jesus talks about it a lot. As you look at the letters that are written to the churches, there's a lot about correction. And as God steps into our life, he comes with an entirely different perspective, that correction is not to injure, and that to be corrected is not to be injured. As a matter of fact, he has a very different perspective on it. Let me take you to what it says about corrections in the Proverbs. And I love the Proverbs because they're just straight to the point. They are incredibly clear. How do I fit as much wisdom in as few words as possible? It's like the Twitter of wisdom. And you come to Proverbs chapter 12, and in Proverbs chapter 12, it speaks to correction and the way in which we engage it in our relationship with it. And so Proverbs 12:1 says this. It says, to learn, you must love discipline. It is stupid to hate correction. It is stupid to hate correction. He says, if you want to be someone who learns, if you want to be someone who grows, if you want to be someone who's able to become all that they were created to be, in order to learn, you must love discipline, this idea of correction, someone speaking in your life, helping to shape and form where it is that you're going. He says you must learn to love it. It's stupid to hate correction. I had my son memorize this verse the other day. I actually did. And he said to me, he said, are you saying I'm stupid? I said, well, that's up to you. How are you going to engage with correction? And I wanted to make sure that we really understood the fullness of what's being said here. And so this week I went back and I went to the Hebrew and I looked at this word in the original languages and just looked at, okay, what is he really trying to communicate here? What's the fullness of this idea? And it's interesting when you look at the original word that's used here, what it really means, what he's trying to unpack here. The word means stupid. It's really straightforward. It's really easy to understand. He says, no. If you want to be one who learns, you have to love discipline. It's stupid to hate correction. And you look at this isn't just about how we think about correction, because love isn't just how we think about correction. Hate isn't just how we think about correction, it's also how we feel about it. And as God steps into our story, he says, you have to pay attention to how you feel about correction, how you think about, how you feel about correction in your life. He does this over and over and over again. I want to take you today to an ancient story where I believe that he does this. And even in saying that we're going to look at an ancient story, there's another thing that's developing inside of our culture where we're beginning to develop an attitude of arrogance towards the past. And whenever someone's talking about those who've come before us, we've tried to figure out any way that we can to discredit anyone who's come before us. And rather than learning from those who've come before us, we discredit them, and they're ignorant, and they're uneducated, and they're this, and they're this, and they're racist, and they're this, and they're this, and they're this. We've figured out all sorts of ways to be able to discredit those who've come before us. And so rather than learning from them, we in our self-righteousness and our arrogance judge them And rather than examining their story and being moved to embrace correction in humility, we in arrogance refuse to learn from those who've come before and also hinder our ability to learn moving forward. The scriptures actually talk about that in Job. It says, just ask the previous generation, pay attention to the experience of our ancestors, for we were born but yesterday and know nothing. Our days on earth are as fleeting as a shadow. But those who came before us will teach you. They will teach you the wisdom of old. I love that picture of the shadow, because the shadows don't slowly dissipate. They just disappear. They're just gone. He said, no. He said, you need to walk in humility and learn from those who've come before you. And one of the great lessons of history is this: embrace correction. One of the great lessons of history is that they always had it wrong. So embrace correction. I talk to our staff about this a lot because my staff needs correction a lot. No, I talk to our staff about this frequently because I point out to them, if you look back on the history of the movement of Jesus Christ, if you look back on the church, since its beginning, the church has always struggled with a blind spot. And you look back at it and you think, how did you believe that? How did you do that? How could you possibly read God's word and think that? There's always been a blind spot. To think that we don't have one today is arrogant and foolish. The lesson of history is you're wrong and you don't have a clue about it. So welcome correction. Walk in humility and beg God to lead you from your foolishness. Embrace it. Don't run from it. Let me take you to this ancient story. It's actually about two individuals who were the sons of Adam and Eve. And as we pick up the story, we start in Genesis chapter 4. It says this. It says, when it was time for the harvest, Cain presented some of his crops as a gift to the Lord. Abel also brought a gift, the best of his firstborn lambs from his flock. The Lord accepted Abel and his gift, but he did not accept Cain and his gift. This made Cain very angry, and he looked dejected. So we start off, and we don't know the fullness of what's happening in the story, but apparently there's been some conversation between God and Cain and Abel about them bringing sacrifices back to him based on how he's provided for them. And so he's taught them in some way to celebrate his provision in their life. Abel does that, and he brings the best, and he brings the first of what God has given to him, and God accepts his sacrifice. Cain, on the other hand, doesn't, and so God rejects his sacrifice. And so, as the story goes, Cain's angry and he's frustrated. And then God steps in and has a really interesting conversation with him. Listen to how the story continues to play out. God steps in and he says this. He says, "Why are you so angry?" the Lord asked Cain. "Why do you look so dejected? You'll be accepted if you do what's right." A couple of really interesting things in this passage. Who screwed up? Cain. If what most of us believe about God is true, in this story, the wrong person's angry. Most of you think if you screw up, God's angry. That's why you run from him when you screw up. But God's not the one who's angry. Cain is. Another thing I love about this passage is this last line. You'll be accepted if you do what is right. He says, Cain, you know what to do. You know what you need to do. I think about this line quite frequently because sometimes I'm like, God, I don't know what to do. But the reality is 99.9% of the time, I know exactly what he wants me to do. It's not usually that I don't know what to do. It's just that I don't do it. He says, Cain, you know what to do. Why are you upset? Just do what you know to do. And in this moment, you see God practicing. Another thing that God teaches us about correction, and that is this. It's found in Proverbs chapter 3. It says this. It says, my child, don't reject the Lord's discipline, and don't be upset when he corrects you, for the Lord corrects those he loves, just as a father corrects a child in whom he delights. The Lord corrects those that he loves. God says not only to learn do you need to love correction, and it's stupid to hate it, but he says, no, you need to understand something. Correction is part of love. Not only is it not to injure, to harm, no. Correction is part of how we love each other. This is part of how I love you. And in this moment, he's demonstrating it perfectly because Cain's the one who blew it. Cain's the one who didn't listen. Cain's the one who didn't bring what he was supposed to bring. But rather than God being angry, in God's love and his mercy and in his gentleness, he steps in and says, Cain, why are you upset? You know what to do. Just do what you know to do. And he lovingly steps in and he's correcting him. So you know what to do, just do it. And then he says something profound. He says, but if you refuse to do what is right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you, but you must subdue it and be its master. Now this is interesting, isn't it? Because he says, Cain, why are you upset? You know what to do. He says, but Cain, listen, Cain, listen, watch out. Because sin is crouching at the door. Now, isn't sin already there? God told Cain what to do, he didn't do it. What's he talking about? What is he calling Cain's attention to? He's teaching Cain something really, really important, and that is this. Sin's greatest power, sin gains power in your life, not in the mistakes that you make, not when you get it wrong. Sin gains power when you reject correction. He's saying, Cain, watch out. Watch out. Because if rather than feeling loved by this, you see this as you being wrong or you not getting what you deserve, or if you don't respond to this correction the right way, sin is going to gain power in your life. And listen to what he says at the end. He says, you must subdue it and be its master. What is he saying? If you don't, it's going to subdue you and be your master. If you don't embrace this correction, if you see this as you being wronged, that it's going to subdue you and be its master. You have to take control of the situation. You have to take control of how you feel about what's happening here. You have to take responsibility for what's happening here. You have to subdue it and get control of it, because if you don't, it's going to get control of you. Listen to me. It's not our mistakes that ruin us, it's our pride. Listen. It's not our mistakes that ruin us, it's our pride. We're all broken, you're going to make mistakes, but how do you respond to correction? How do you respond to correction? If in pride we see it as an attack and I've been wrong, and it's going to subdue you, and it's going to become your master. And when that happens, you start to blame everybody but you. Everybody but you. It's not my fault, it's his fault. It's not my fault, God, it's your fault. It's not my fault, it's Abel's fault. It's exactly what happened in Cain's life, because rather than him valuing correction, rather than him subduing and mastering those feelings that are welling up inside of him, he became mastered by it. And as the story continues, he first blames God, he then blames his brother, and eventually murders him. The turning point in the story, listen, the turning point in the story isn't when Cain brings the wrong sacrifice. Everything could have been fine, even with that happening. The turning point in the story is how Cain engages correction. And God's saying, you better pay attention. You have to pay attention to how you view correction, how you think about it, how you feel about it. Because in order to learn, in order to grow, in order for you to be who I created for you to be, in order for you to experience the journey that I have for you, you have to love discipline. You have to love correction. And to follow Jesus is to embrace correction. To say, I want for you to be the Lord of my life. I want for you to be my Father who takes me by the hand and leads me into what it is that you have in store for me. I want your correction in my life because you know and I don't. The ancient King David, he at times, he cries out for God's correction. He talks about how he values it, how he loves it, because he knows that without it, he's lost. And that's true for every single one of us. Without it, we're lost. But we have to have the humility. We have to have the humility to embrace God's correction. To follow Jesus is to embrace his correction, but it's also to step into a community. When Jesus launches his movement, as he's teaching his disciples, okay, this is what it's going to be like. He doesn't just call us to embrace his correction. He calls us to love one another through correction, to speak truth into one another's lives, to be able to address when we're moving in directions that are going to destroy us. It's not just that we welcome his correction, it's that we welcome correction inside of community, that we see it as part of what it means to love. That we're speaking truth, that we're calling out and identifying the things in each other's lives that are going to keep us from experiencing God the way that we were created to experience him. And I know whenever I begin to go down this road, I know, and some of you right now are actually working on it. You have your phone out and you're writing me an email right now. And I know exactly what the email says. It says, no, Chris, you're talking about us speaking correction in one another's lives, but Jesus says don't judge. Jesus taught not to judge. So you can just stop your email. You just stop right now. Because here's what we're going to do. We're going to go there. Let's just go there. Let's go to where he said that. And let's look at it. Let's break it down. So we're going to jump into that conversation because Jesus is talking to the crowds. He's actually talking in this conversation he's talking through a lot of different things. And he comes to the point of the conversation where he begins to talk about our interaction with one another, specifically speaking correction into one another's lives. And it starts off, and Jesus says this. He says, "Do not judge others, and you will not be judged. And you say, yeah, Chris, there it is. What do you mean? I thought, what? That's exactly what I said. Clearly, we're not supposed to correct one another. We're not supposed to. It says, don't judge others and you will not be judged. But here's the problem. You stopped there. Jesus didn't. And so he continues. For you will be treated as you treat others. The standard you use in judging is the standard by which you will be judged. Now, here's the thing. There are multiple points where Jesus addresses hypocrites. And he says to them, listen, you heap huge burdens on other people that you yourself are not willing to carry. You call people to things that you're not willing to address in your own life. You're constantly judging people by things that you're not willing to be judged by. And that's exactly what he's walking through as he walks into this passage. And what he's saying is this, listen, if you're not willing to welcome correction in your life, you don't be giving out correction in others. That's what he's saying. He's saying if you're not willing to welcome it, don't give it. He's saying don't correct people, don't call people to a standard that you're not willing to be called to yourself. He's not saying that you don't do it at all. He's saying, no, make sure that you're paying attention to this. Don't call them to this, and then you abstain from, you opt out of correction yourself. He said, no. You need to be willing to engage it the same way that they're willing to engage it. In case that's not clear, he keeps going, and he tells a story. It's meant to illustrate this. He says, just in case you don't get it, let me paint the picture for you. Let me paint the picture for you. And so he continues. As he continues, he says, and why worry about a speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? How can you think of saying to your friend, let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye when you can't see past the log in your own eye? Well, again, some of you are saying, wait, isn't he saying like, don't worry about them, just take care of yourself. Don't worry about their problems, just take care of your own problem. But again, we sometimes stop here. Jesus didn't. So he keeps going. Hypocrite, first get rid of the log in your own eye. Then what? Then you will see well enough to deal with a speck in your friend's eye. What's the point of the story? What's the point of the story? Nobody has anything in their eye. The point of the story isn't, hey, don't worry about them, you just worry about you. That's not the point of the story. That's not the end. That's not the conclusion. The conclusion isn't everybody worries about themselves. The conclusion is, listen, you have to be welcome. You have to welcome correction in your own life, not just speak it into others. And you need to be willing to deal with what you need to deal with in your own life. Why? So you can help others. The point of the passage isn't that we don't speak into each other's lives. The point of the passage is that you have a community where you welcome correction so that we can help each other see. And Jesus is saying, guys, this is the community that I'm building. It's not a community where some people stand back and judge others. No. It's a community where people are helping each other and they're speaking truth into one another's lives so that they can help each other see, so that they can help each other learn, so that they can help each other grow, so that they can help each other to experience the fullness of the life that God created them to live. We have to change the way that we think about and the way that we feel about correction. To follow Jesus is to value correction. Is to step into community and value correction And sometimes people will say to me, no, Chris, I stand before God. I stand before God alone. God alone will judge me. That is so foolish. It's so foolish. No one goes to the IRS without first talking to their accountant. Unless they're a fool. No one goes before the king without first asking someone else how they look. Do they? No. And Jesus, he brings us into this community. He says, no. Correction isn't something to run from, something to avoid. You don't look at it as being injured or being wronged. He says, no, this is part of the beauty of the community that I'm creating, that you can speak truth into one another's lives. In Matthew 18, Jesus talks about how we do this, and he talks about speaking that truth into one another's lives. As you continue to work through the New Testament and look at the different letters to the church, Paul writes to the church at Corinthians, and the book of 1 Corinthians is almost entirely about that. How we speak truth into one another's lives, and the necessity for it, the importance for it. He writes to the church at Ephesus, and he talks about the same thing. As a matter of fact, he says the way that we grow up into the fullness that we were intended to be in Christ is by speaking the truth in love to one another. James, the brother of Jesus, when he's writing to the church, he talks about the same thing. This is not a minor aspect of what it means to follow Jesus. It's not a minor aspect of how we engage life and the community that we're in and what community looks like. This is a massive aspect. It's it's essential. And in a world that is moving more and more towards this idea that to correct is to injure or to wrong someone, we have to fight against that. You have to make sure that you're consistently filling your mind with the truth of what God's taught us about correction. We have to be careful with the way in which we think. The scriptures tell us that we're transformed by the renewing of our minds, the changing the way that we think. We have to make sure that we're thinking about this the way that God's taught us to think about it. That no. To learn, you have to love. To learn, you have to love discipline. It's stupid to hate correction. We have to think about it the way that God talks about it, the way that God's taught us to talk about it. But we also have to, again, this isn't just how you think. This is how you feel. You have to change the way that we feel about it. And I know some of you think, well, you can't change the way that you feel. You absolutely can change the way you feel. Your feelings are not the master of you. He is speaking directly about this to Cain when he says, listen, you better subdue it and become its master or it's going to subdue you. He's talking about how he feels. Your feelings are not the master of you. You are the master of them. We have to change not just how we think about it, we have to change how we feel about it. You say, well, how in the world do you do that? You change it through faith. What I mean by that is this. Faith is not feeling like something is true. Faith is acting like something is true even when you don't feel like it. And so God says, value correction. And you say, I don't feel like that. I don't feel like doing that at all. But you do it in faith because God has called you to it. And when you follow God in faith, what happens is that you experience His faithfulness in it, and it changes the way you feel about it. Your feelings don't lead you to faith. Faith leads your feelings. And to do that as it pertains to correction is to decide that, no, I'm going to welcome this in my life. And to identify people in your life from which you seek correction. To go to them and say, listen, I want for you to speak correction in my life. Where do you see, like, I'm not engaging God the way that I should be. I'm not following Jesus the way that I should be. That I'm not loving the people around me the way that I should be. Engage them in that conversation. It's not going to be easy at first. It's not It's not going to be fun at first. It's going to be awkward for you. It's going to be awkward for them. After the first service, one of my friends was talking to me about this, and he said, I want more of this from you. And I was like, I got nothing for you right now, man. I'd be making something up if I shared something. It was, even there, it was awkward. But here's the thing. If you continue in it, Hebrews says it this way when it's talking about discipline. He says, no discipline is enjoyable, but it bears incredible fruit in your life. A harvest of goodness and righteousness. It bears incredible fruit. When you experience that, then it becomes worth it. It changes the way, your entire experience of it. And at first it's scary. But as you engage it more and more, it changes. Every time I walk off this stage, if you watch me, I walk out that door. That door is straight over there. There's about 4 or 5 other people who also walk out the side doors if you watch. And we walk out into that hallway, and immediately after every conversation, they're giving me feedback. You did this well. That joke was minorly offensive. I wouldn't do that again. And they're walking me through. They were with you here. I really didn't think you had them here. I would do this more. And they're giving me all that feedback. When that first started, it was difficult for me. Now, I'm used to it. I enjoy it. I love it. Your experience of it changes. And if you'll, in faith, decide, no, I'm going to learn to love discipline. I'm not going to be stupid about this journey. I'm going to invite it into my life. Now, I'm not saying to be dumb about this. There are people in your life you don't need to get feedback from. If there's someone in your life that hates correction, don't ask them for correction because they're stupid. But you need people like that in your life. And you need to actively invite them to speak into your life. It's not typical to welcome correction. It's typical to be afraid of it. It's typical to despise it. It's not typical to see it as love. It's not typical to see that it fits into love. This has been messing with my mind all week long because I've been looking at these passages where God's talking about his love for us and how that's connected to correction and how love is connected to correction, and it's messing with my head. You know why? Because as I look back over the past year, there have been very few people who actually spoke correction into my life. If love is tied to correction, why am I not hearing it more? Are we actually loving each other at all? It's messing with my head. Now, don't get me wrong. As I thought about that, I thought, man, my wife loves me really well. Loves me really well. It's not typical to see correction that way. It's not typical to value it. I watch this happen so often here at Hoboken Grace because I watch leaders have difficult conversations with people and they're speaking truth into their life. And I watch this happen, and I know that as that leader's having that conversation with that person, no one in that person's life loves them as much as that leader. I know it. But rather than them valuing that, they run from it. Rather than them embracing it, they become angry about it. And they run from it. And I've sat so many times with a broken heart and just thought, you just ran from the one person who actually loved you. You just rejected the one person who actually loved you. But it's not typical to value correction. But then again, wisdom never is. It's not typical to welcome it. It's not typical to see it as love. It's not typical to value it. But wisdom is never typical. As you engage this journey, who will you be? Who will you be? It has everything to do with how you think about and how you train yourself to feel about correction. It's not typical, but it's remarkably powerful. Will you pray with me? Father, as we process this is so far from how we naturally feel. This is so far from what we hear constantly in the world around us. So far from what for many of us we've been taught. But Father, no one's loved us like you have. And there's no one we trust more than you. And so we ask you today, to continue to develop in us an appreciation for, an excitement about, a passion for correction. And Father, I thank you. I thank you that you are faithful in your correction in our lives. That you over and over and over again, lovingly and gently and kindly call us out of that which would destroy us and into life. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.